The forest did not just break apart. It vanished in a single second as a red streak fell from the sky and slammed into the earth. The sound hit the mountains later, and it was so loud that bears waking up from winter sleep miles away died instantly from the shock. The ground rolled like water in the ocean. Trees that had stood tall for hundreds of years snapped in half and flew through the air like toothpicks. A cloud of dust and dirt rose up higher than the clouds and blocked out the late afternoon sun. The shockwave traveled across the whole country of Japan in a heartbeat. It rattled the teacups in houses far away in the city. It knocked over lanterns in the temples. It made the air feel heavy and hard to breathe. In the hidden Infinity Castle, the demon woman, Nakimi, struck a wrong note. On her instrument for the first time in centuries, the endless wooden rooms twisted and slammed into each other because she lost control. Her hands were shaking and she did not know why. Deep in the shadows, Muzan Kibutsuji froze. He was pretending to be a human in a busy town, but he stopped walking. He dropped the book he was holding. Every cell in his body screamed at him to run away. He felt a sudden cold chill that went right to his bones. He was the king of demons and he was scared. He looked toward the mountains and his red eyes widened. He did not know what had landed, but he knew it was stronger than him. He knew it was stronger than anything. At the headquarters of the Demon Slayer Corps, the master Kagaya Ubuyashiki fell forward and coughed up blood. His wife caught him before he hit the floor. He turned his blind eyes toward the disturbance. The wind smelled like burning rocks and ozone. He felt the balance of the world tip over on its side. The pillars of the earth were cracking. The Hashira, who were training in different places, all stopped at the same time. Sanemi the wind. Hashira felt the breeze die. Kiyome, the stone Hashira, felt the earth tremble under his feet, and he started to pray. They all gripped their swords tight. They thought it was a new upper moon demon, or maybe Muzan himself starting a war. They were wrong. It was not a demon, and it was not a war. It was just a man who was very confused. In the center of the giant hole in the ground, the dust began to settle. The crater was huge and the edges were hot and glowing red. A bald man in a yellow suit stood up and patted the dirt off his white cape. He looked around with a bored face. He blinked his eyes. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. It was a coupon for the grocery store. He let out a long sigh. He was supposed to be buying cabbage for dinner because it was on sale. Now he was in a strange forest and his clothes were dirty. He did not know where he was. He did not know that his landing had scared every living thing for 100 miles. He kicked a small rock out of his way. The rock flew so fast it turned into a fireball and punched a clean hole through a mountain peak in the distance. The mountain crumbled, but the man did not notice. He just wanted to go home. He started walking out of the crater looking for a road. He was Saitama, and he was just a hero for fun. He did not know that he had just walked into a world of demons and swords. He did not care about demons. He only cared that he was going to miss the sale at the supermarket. The world of Demon Slayer was a place of tragedy and struggle, where humans fought hard just to survive the night. But now, the rules were broken. The strongest being in the universe had arrived, and he was already annoyed. Saitama walked down the mountain path, and the silence was absolute. Usually forests had sounds like birds chirping, or insects buzzing, or wind rustling the leaves. But this forest was dead quiet, because every living thing with a survival instinct had fled the moment he landed. He looked down at his red gloves, and brushed a speck of grey dust off the yellow fabric. He was still trying to figure out which direction the city was in, but the landscape was wrong. There were no power lines cutting through the sky. There were no paved roads. There were no distant sounds of traffic or construction. The air smelled different here. It smelled like wet earth and old pine needles and something else that was faint and metallic like rust. He touched the top of his bald head and sighed because the sun was starting to set and the temperature was dropping fast. He did not feel the cold because his body was impervious to temperature, but he knew that meant the shops would be closing soon. He adjusted his white cape, which was fluttering in the gentle breeze, and continued walking with a slump in his posture. He had faced conquerors of the universe and deep-sea kings and genetically modified beetles, but his greatest enemy right now was the fact that he was lost and he had no map. The dirt path wound around the side of a cliff and opened up into a valley where he could see smoke rising from small chimneys. It looked like a village, but it was old-fashioned. The houses were made of wood and paper, and the roofs were thatched with straw or tiled with heavy grey clay. It looked like a movie set for a historical drama, but it felt too real. There were no cameras and no directors yelling cut. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the shadows in the forest stretched out like long black fingers. Saitama did not care about the dark, but the world around him certainly did. Deep in the thicket of trees, a pair of eyes opened. They were yellow and slit like a cat, but filled with a hunger that was distinctly unnatural. The creature was hunched over a pile of bones. It was a demon, a creature that survived by eating human flesh and hiding from the sun. This demon had been starving for 3 days, and it smelled a human walking alone on the path. The scent was strange. Usually humans smelled like fear or sweat or determination. This human smelled like nothing. It was a blank void in the air. The demon licked its lips and its tongue was long and covered in barbs. It thought this was a trap at first, but the human was walking with such a lack of awareness that it had to be a fool. The demon dug its claws into the bark of the cedar tree and scurried up the trunk without making a sound. It moved through the canopy, jumping from branch to branch, tracking the yellow figure below. The demon was not a powerful one. It was not one of the 12 Kazuki. It was just a bottom feeder that preyed on travelers and woodcutters. It saw the bald head reflecting the last light of the sun and thought that the skull would be easy to crack open. It salivated at the thought of the brain inside. It waited until the man passed underneath a large overhang of rock. The demon tensed its leg muscles, which were bulging with veins, and launched itself downward. It aimed for the neck, intending to sever the spine in one bite. Saitama stopped walking. He felt a mosquito land on his neck. He slapped the back of his neck with a casual motion. There was a wet thud. The demon did not even have time to register that his attack had failed. The slap connected with the demon's head mid-air. The force of the impact was not like a hand hitting flesh. It was like a mountain hitting a grape. The demon's head, torso, and limbs were instantly liquefied by the kinetic energy transfer. The air pressure from the slap blew a crater into the rock wall next to them. Saitama looked at his hand. It was covered in a dark purple slime. He groaned and wiped it on the grass. He thought it was a really big bug. He did not know he had just killed a creature that required a Nichiren sword to execute. He did not know about regeneration, because there was nothing left to regenerate. The cells had been atomized. He continued walking down the path, leaving a smear of biological paste that used to be a threat to humanity. He reached the village as the last light faded. The village was small, with maybe 50 houses clustered around a central well. Lanterns were being lit, but the people seemed hurried and anxious. They were closing their shutters and barring their doors with heavy wooden planks. A few villagers paused to look at him. They stared at his clothes. The bright yellow suit with the zipper and the white cape looked ridiculous in this era of kimonos and haori. They stared at his shiny head. A woman pulling a cart with rice bags hurried past him, keeping her head down. An old man smoking a pipe by a doorway squinted at him with suspicion. Saitama walked up to the old man. He raised a hand in greeting. He asked if there was a convenience store nearby or a train station. The old man took the pipe out of his mouth and stared at him like he was speaking a foreign language. The old man asked what a convenience store was. Saitama felt a headache coming on. He explained he wanted to buy cabbage. The old man pointed down the street to a closed stall and said the market was over for the day and he should go inside because it was dangerous at night. Saitama asked why it was dangerous. The old man's eyes widened. He whispered that the man-eating demons came out at night and anyone outside would be torn apart. Saitama nodded politely. He had heard this kind of thing before. Monsters, villains, aliens. It was always the same. He asked if there was an inn where he could stay. The old man pointed to a larger building with a sign he could barely read. Saitama walked into the inn. The interior was warm and smelled of miso soup, which made his stomach growl. The innkeeper was a stout woman who looked terrified to see a stranger walk in after dark. Saitama reached into his pocket and pulled out his coin purse. He placed a few modern Japanese yen coins on the counter. The metal coins clinked on the wood. The innkeeper looked at the coins. She picked one up and examined the engraving. She shook her head and pushed them back. She said they did not take foreign money. Saitama froze. He realized with a sinking horror that his money was worthless here. He was broke. He was hungry. He was lost in a forest village that didn't have a supermarket, and now he couldn't even buy a bowl of rice. His face went blank with shock. This was a catastrophe worse than the meteor. He tried to negotiate. He offered to wash dishes. The innkeeper looked at his strange clothes and his intense expression and decided he was a lunatic, but she was a kind woman. She told him he could sleep in the stable with the horses, and she would give him some leftover rice balls if he chopped wood for the morning fire. Saitama accepted the deal immediately. He went out back to the woodpile. There was a large axe leaning against a stump. He looked at the pile of thick logs. He picked up a log and set it on the stump. He didn't use the axe. He just chopped the wood with the side of his hand. He moved so fast his arm was a blur. In 3 seconds, the entire winter supply of wood was chopped into perfectly even pieces. He stacked them neatly. He went back inside. The innkeeper stared at him. She hadn't even had time to pour the tea. She asked if he gave up. He pointed to the neat wall of firewood outside. She looked out the window and dropped the teacup. It shattered on the floor. While Saitama sat in the stable, eating a rice ball with immense gratitude, the atmosphere in the region was shifting. The crow that flew above the village was agitated. It was a Kasugai crow assigned to a demon slayer named Murata. Murata was currently patrolling a sector 10 miles away, but the crow had seen the impact in the mountains earlier. The crow had also seen the purple stain on the rock where the demon had been slapped. The crow did not have the vocabulary to explain what it saw, but it knew the balance of power had shifted. It flew fast towards the headquarters to deliver a report of an anomaly. Meanwhile, in the shadows of the Infinity Castle, Muzan Kibutsuji was pacing. The demon lord was still shaken by the tremor he had felt. He could not pinpoint the source. It felt like the sun had briefly touched the earth, but it was night. He summoned a lower moon. It was lower moon 6, a demon named Kamanui, who was trembling in fear before his master. Muzan did not look at him. He ordered Kamanui to go to the mountains in the west and investigate the disturbance. He told him to kill anything he found there. He told him that if he failed, he would strip his bones of flesh. Kamanui bowed until his forehead bled on the tatami mats and vanished. Muzan stood alone in the shifting gravity of his fortress. He was a being of absolute caution. He had survived 1,000 years by being a coward when it mattered. And right now, his instincts were screaming at him to hide. Back in the village, the night deepened. The clouds covered the moon and the darkness was total. The oil lamps flickered in the wind. Saitama was asleep in the hay. He was snoring. A horse nudged him with its nose, but he didn't wake up. Outside the village perimeter, the silence was broken by the sound of shuffling feet. It wasn't one demon. It was a pack. Usually, demons did not work together unless ordered, but these were attracted by the massive release of kinetic energy from Saitama's arrival. They were drawn to it like moths to a flame, thinking it was a source of power they could consume. There were 5 of them. They were grotesque deformities of flesh. One had arms that dragged on the ground. Another had 3 eyes and a mouth on its stomach. They crept into the village. They smelled the humans huddling inside the wooden houses. The leader of the pack hissed and pointed at the inn. It smelled the most life there. They moved past the stable. They ignored the bald man sleeping in the hay because he had no presence. He felt like a rock or a tree to them. They wanted the juicy, fear-filled humans inside. The attack began with a crash. The demon with the long arm smashed through the front door of the inn. The innkeeper screamed. The sound was piercing. Wood splintered and flew across the room. The patrons who were eating late dinner scrambled back in terror. The demon laughed a wet, gurgling sound and grabbed a man by the leg. It threw him across the room, and he hit the wall with a sickening crunch. The other demons poured in through the windows. It was a massacre in seconds. Blood sprayed on the clean tatami mats. The screams woke up the village. People ran out of their houses, but the other demons were waiting. Panic took over. It was the nightmare scenario every person in this era feared. The Slayers were too far away. There was no hope. Murata was running as fast as he could through the forest, his lungs burning, but he was miles away. He could hear the screams carried on the wind, and tears streamed down his face because he knew he would be too late. He gripped his sword and cursed his weakness. In the stable, Saitama opened one eye. The noise was loud. He sat up and picked a piece of straw out of his ear. He yawned. He wondered why people were screaming. He thought maybe there was a fire. He stood up and brushed the hay off his suit. He walked out of the stable and into the courtyard. He saw the chaos. He saw the monsters tearing through the walls of the inn. He saw the innkeeper cornered by the 3-eyed demon. The demon raised a claw to gut her. Saitama frowned. He didn't like it when people interrupted his sleep, and he didn't like bullies. He walked toward the broken front door of the inn. He stepped over the debris. The demon with the long arms turned around. It was holding a severed arm in its mouth. It saw the bald man in the yellow suit. It dropped the arm and hissed. It lunged at Saitama with claws that could slice through steel. Saitama didn't dodge. He didn't block. He just walked forward. The claws raked across his chest. The fabric of his suit tore slightly, but the skin underneath didn't even scratch. The demon looked confused. It struck again, harder this time, aiming for the eyes. The claw bounced off Saitama's eyelid as he blinked. Saitama looked at the torn fabric of his suit. He was annoyed. He only had one hero suit, and he didn't know how to sew. He looked at the demon. He said that was his favorite suit. The demon roared and opened its mouth to bite his head off. Saitama punched it. It was a low-effort punch, a warning shot. But a warning shot from Saitama was still an extinction event for a demon. The demon's torso vanished. It didn't just break apart. It disintegrated into a cone of red mist that blasted out the back of the inn and cleared a path through the forest behind it for 3 miles. The air pressure shockwave extinguished every lantern in the village. The sudden vacuum pulled the other demons off their feet. The silence returned instantly. The innkeeper opened her eyes. She was covered in dust but alive. She looked at the spot where the monster had been. There was nothing there. Just the bald man standing with his fist slightly extended. Steam was rising from his glove. The other 4 demons in the village froze. They were creatures of instinct, and their instinct told them that they were no longer the predators. They looked at the man. He turned to face them. His face was drawn in a simple, bored expression, but his eyes were the dark voids. He told them to keep it down because people were trying to sleep. The 3-eyed demon shrieked and attacked out of sheer terror. It fired a blood demon art, a blast of acidic bile. Saitama swatted the bile away with the back of his hand. The acid splashed onto a rock and melted it, but Saitama's glove was fine. He appeared in front of the 3-eyed demon in a blink. He chopped the top of its head. The demon collapsed into a pile of ash, faster than it would have if the sun had hit it. The remaining 3 demons turned and ran. They ran faster than they had ever run in their lives. They scrambled over the roofs and dashed toward the forest. Saitama watched them go. He picked up a pebble from the ground. He tossed it lightly. The pebble flew through the air, broke the sound barrier, and pierced the skulls of all 3 fleeing demons in a single straight line. They dusted into nothingness mid-stride. Saitama dusted his hands. He looked at the innkeeper, who was shaking uncontrollably. He asked if breakfast was still included in the deal since he saved the building. She couldn't speak. She just nodded slowly. The villagers began to creep out of their hiding spots. They looked at the destruction. They looked at the hole in the inn that went through the forest. They looked at the man in the yellow suit. They did not cheer. In the world of heroes, people cheered. In the world of Demon Slayer, people were traumatized. They were terrified of him too. He was a force of nature they did not understand. They knelt on the ground and bowed to him, not out of gratitude, but out of awe and fear. They thought he was a god or a spirit. Saitama felt awkward. He hated this kind of attention. He just wanted to go back to sleep. 10 minutes later, Murata arrived. He burst into the village square, his sword drawn, breathing heavily, ready to die fighting. He expected to find corpses. He expected to find a bloodbath. Instead, he found the village quiet. The demons were gone. There was no smell of demon blood because the demons had been vaporized so thoroughly there was no residue. He saw the massive hole in the forest. He saw the villagers bowing to a bald man eating a rice ball. Murata approached cautiously. He sensed no battle spirit from the man. He sensed no breathing technique. He walked up to Saitama. He asked what happened. Saitama swallowed the rice. He pointed at the forest and said some weird guys in costumes broke the wall, so he chased them off. Murata looked at the destruction. It looked like a natural disaster had hit the specific coordinates of the demons. He looked at Saitama's face. It was completely unreadable. Murata realized this was above his pay grade. He pulled out his crow. He whispered a message to be sent to the Hashira immediately. He reported that the threat was neutralized, but the cause was unknown. He stayed to help the villagers. He watched Saitama go back to the stable. Murata didn't sleep that night. He sat outside the stable, gripping his sword, watching the sleeping man. He felt like he was guarding a sleeping dragon. The next morning, the news reached the Ubuyashiki estate. Kagaya listened to the report from his crow. A village attacked by a pack of demons. No casualties. The demons obliterated. A stranger in yellow garments. Kagaya's intuition, which had guided the call for years, told him this was the turning point. He coughed into his hand. He summoned his children. He told them to send a message to the water Hashira Gayu Tomioka and the insect Hashira Shinobu Kocho. They were to travel to the village immediately. They were to assess the stranger. If he was a threat, they were to eliminate him. If he was an ally, they were to recruit him. But Kagaya had a feeling it would not be that simple. He felt a strange hope he hadn't felt in years. He felt that the stagnant war between humans and demons had just been kicked into motion. Saitama woke up early. He chopped the rest of the wood for the innkeeper. She gave him a bag of rice balls and some dried fish. He thanked her and asked for directions to the nearest city. She pointed east towards a large town where the train station was. Saitama set off. He walked along the road eating a rice ball. He was still worried about the sale he missed. He didn't know that he was being tracked. High in the trees, a figure with a mask and a fox design was watching him. It was a covert observer for the Corps. And deeper in the shadows, the eye of an upper moon was opening. Upper Moon 3, Akaza, had been training nearby. He had felt the shockwave of the punch the night before. It had excited him. He loved strong opponents. He sensed a fighting spirit that was non-existent, yet produced power that rivaled the natural world. Akaza smiled. He changed his course. He abandoned his search for the blue spider lily. He began to run towards the signature of the void. He wanted to see who had punched the sky. Saitama walked for hours. The sun was hot. He reached the town the innkeeper had mentioned. It was bustling. There were soldiers in uniform and people in Western clothes mixed with kimonos. There was a steam train puffing smoke at the station. Saitama's spirits lifted. A train meant civilization. Civilization meant he could find a map and maybe a way home. He walked towards the station. He didn't notice the people parting around him. He didn't notice the hush that fell over the crowd. A group of demon slayers was walking through the street. They were low-ranked, Mizunoto rank. They saw Saitama. They saw the torn suit. They saw the strange aura of absolute flatness around him. They blocked his path. The leader, a young man with a scar on his cheek, told Saitama to identify himself. He said Saitama looked suspicious. Saitama sighed. He said he was just a guy who was a hero for fun. The Slayers looked at each other. They had never heard of a hero. They asked what breathing style he used. Saitama asked if they meant yoga. The Slayers got angry. They thought he was mocking them. They put their hands on their swords. Saitama looked at the swords. He said they looked dangerous and they shouldn't play with knives in public. The leader drew his sword. He wanted to intimidate the stranger. He swung the blade, stopping an inch from Saitama's nose. Saitama didn't blink. He looked at the blade. He flicked it with his finger. The blade shattered into 1,000 pieces. The sound was like a glass window breaking. The Slayer stared at his handle, which was now holding nothing. Saitama apologized. He said he didn't know they were cheap props. He walked past the stunned Slayers and headed for the ticket booth. The interaction was witnessed by a young girl with a butterfly ornament in her hair. Kanao Tsuyuri stood on a roof watching. She flipped a coin. It came up heads. She did not engage. She turned and vanished to report to her master Shinobu. The pieces were moving on the board. The unknown variable had arrived, and he was already breaking the rules of the game just by walking down the street. Saitama bought a ticket with the coins the innkeeper had given him. He boarded the train. It was the Mugen train. He found a seat and sat down. He looked out the window. He hoped this train would take him to Z City. He didn't know that on this train, a lower moon was already putting the passengers to sleep. He didn't know that the flame Hashira Kyojuro Rengoku was in the next car eating a box lunch, shouting delicious with every bite. Saitama closed his eyes. He fell asleep instantly. He was immune to the demon's sleep spell, not because of magic resistance, but because his mind was so simple and his will so absolute. that the spell slid off him like water off a duck. The demon Enmu, who was fused with the train, felt a heavy weight board his body. He felt a presence that made his blood run cold. He didn't know what it was, but he knew he couldn't put it to sleep. He decided to ignore it and focus on the Hashira. That was his first and last mistake. The train whistle blew, and the wheels began to turn, carrying the strongest man in existence and the strongest spirit of the core into a collision course that would derail history. The Mugen train rattled over the tracks with a rhythmic clatter that usually lulled passengers to sleep. But tonight, the air inside the cars was thick with an unseen tension. Saitama sat across the aisle from a young man with bright yellow and red hair, who was eating box lunches with an intensity that was frightening. The man was Kyojuro Rengoku, the flame Hashira, and he shouted delicious after every bite. Saitama stared at him. He wanted to tell him to be quiet, but he saw the sword at the man's waist and decided not to get involved in another argument with a weapon enthusiast. The train car was warm. The gas lamps flickered. Saitama leaned his head against the cold glass of the window. He saw his own reflection. He looked tired. He closed his eyes and drifted off, not because of a spell, but because he was bored. The demon Enmu, standing on top of the train, smiled as he felt the consciousness of 200 passengers slip into his domain. He flexed his hands and the blood demon art activated. Ropes of magic extended from his subordinates who were already seated in the cars. They tied themselves to the sleepers. They prepared to enter the dreams and destroy the spiritual cause of the victims. One of the subordinates, a pale girl with sunken eyes, tied her rope to the bald man in the yellow suit. She did not know who he was. She only knew that the demon Lord Enmu had ordered them to kill everyone. She closed her eyes and entered Saitama's dreamscape. Usually, a dreamscape was a reflection of the soul. Tanjiro Kamado's dream was a snowy mountain of regret and family warmth. Rengoku's dream was a fire of discipline and unresolved father issues. The girl expected to find memories or fears. Instead, she found herself standing in a grey void. There was no ground. There was no sky. There was just an infinite stretch of grey static. In the distance, she saw a single giant cabbage floating in the air with a red discount sticker on it. She walked towards it confused. As she got closer, the cabbage turned into a giant fist. The pressure in the dream world spiked. The gravity crushed her down. She realized with a screaming horror that this mind had no walls and no core to destroy, because there was nothing there to break. It was a fortress of absolute simplicity. In the real world, the girl began to seizure. Foam poured from her mouth. The rope connecting her to Saitama burst into flames and turned to ash. Saitama frowned in his sleep and scratched his nose. Tanjiro Kamado woke up. He had broken the spell by cutting his own neck in the dream, a feat of will that defied human limits. He gasped for air, his uniform soaked in sweat. He smelled the scent of sulfur and rotting meat. He drew his black sword. He saw the other passengers sleeping. He saw Rengoku sitting upright, eyes open but unseeing. Tanjiro tried to wake him, but the Hashira was locked in battle within his own mind. The train gave a lurch. It did not feel like a mechanical movement. It felt like the heave of a giant beast. The walls of the train car began to ripple. Flesh bubbled up from the floorboards. Eyes opened on the ceiling. Enmu had finished his preparation. He was no longer on the train. He was the train. The demon had fused his entire biological mass with the iron and wood of the locomotive. Every passenger was now inside his stomach. Tanjiro screamed for his friends to wake up. Zenitsu Agatsuma and Inosuke Hashibira broke through their dreams. Inosuke head-butted the ceiling and roared. He sensed the enemy was everywhere. The battle that followed was a desperate scramble for survival. Tanjiro and Inosuke fought their way through the cars. slicing at the tentacles of flesh that sprouted from the seats. They were trying to find the neck of the demon, but the demon was 200 tons of steel and meat. Rengoku awoke with a burst of flame that incinerated the tentacles threatening the passengers in the rear cars. He moved so fast the air burned around him. He gave orders to the young slayers, his voice booming with authority. He told them to find the head while he defended the hostages. Rengoku was a master of the battlefield. He filled the space with his spirit. He cut faster than the eye could follow, but he was fighting a losing battle of attrition. The train was regenerating as fast as he could cut. For every tentacle he severed, 3 more appeared. The train accelerated. It was moving at dangerous speeds, now rocking violently on the tracks. Saitama was sliding back and forth in his seat. The tentacles of Enmu ignored him at first because he had no spiritual presence. To the demon, he was just luggage. But as the train grew more aggressive, a mass of flesh erupted from the seat next to him. It was a mouth with jagged teeth intended to bite the head off a sleeping woman. Saitama shifted in his sleep. His elbow nudged the flesh mouth. The impact was light for him, but for the demon flesh, it was like being hit by a pile of driver. The mouth exploded into a spray of purple gore. Enmu felt a sharp, inexplicable pain in his side. He didn't understand it. He focused his attention on the anomaly. He saw the bald man. He decided to consume him. Hundreds of flesh tendrils shot out from the walls, wrapping around Saitama's arms and legs and neck. They squeezed with enough force to crush a tank. Saitama opened his eyes. He was having a dream that he was being entangled in seaweed at the beach. He woke up and found himself covered in slimy meat ropes. He looked around. The train car looked like the inside of a stomach. Teeth were growing out of the windows. Rengoku was surrounded by fire at the end of the car, slicing at the walls. Saitama blinked. He thought he was still dreaming. He tried to pull his arm free. The flesh rope snapped like wet paper. He stood up. The train shook violently as it went around a curve. Saitama lost his balance. He stumbled. His hand reached out to catch himself. He grabbed the wall of the train. His fingers dug into the steel and flesh. He didn't mean to grip it hard. He just wanted to steady himself. But his grip strength was infinite. He tore a chunk of the train wall out. A hole the size of a refrigerator opened up to the night sky. The wind roared in. Enmu screamed. The pain was not just physical, it was existential. A piece of his main body had just been ripped away with zero effort. The train began to convulse. Tanjiro and Inosuke were on the roof fighting towards the engine. They heard the scream. They felt the train shudder. Inside the car, Rengoku stopped his attack. He stared at the bald man who was holding a piece of the train wall. Saitama looked at the chunk of metal and meat in his hand. He looked at the hole. He looked at Rengoku. He asked if this was normal for this train line because he wanted a refund. Rengoku did not know what to say. He sensed no breathing technique from the man. He sensed no aura. But his eyes told him that the man had just torn through the demon's armor like it was tofu. Suddenly, the train screeched. Enmu realized the danger. He concentrated all his power. He shifted his regeneration to the car where Saitama was. He abandoned the attack on Tanjiro. He needed to crush the anomaly. The wall slammed inward. The ceiling collapsed. Spikes of bone and steel shot at Saitama from every direction. It was a kill box designed to annihilate a Hashira. Saitama saw the spikes coming. He didn't move. The spikes hit his yellow suit and shattered. They broke into dust. The flesh walls pressed in on him, trying to suffocate him. Saitama sighed. He was getting slime on his cape. He decided he had enough. He made a fist. He didn't wind up. He didn't take a stance. He just punched the floor of the train car. The impact was not a sound. It was a cancellation of sound. The force traveled through the floor straight into the wheels and the tracks and the earth below. The train did not derail in the traditional sense. The train stopped existing as a cohesive structure. The kinetic energy vaporized the undercarriage. The tracks for 500 meters were pulverized into iron filings. The ground erupted upwards in a pillar of dirt and stone. The train cars were thrown into the air like toys. The bond between Enmu and the train was severed instantly by the shock. The demon didn't die from a decapitation. He died because his physical form was scattered across 3 prefectures. Tanjiro and Inosuke were thrown clear by the blast. Rengoku grabbed the passengers near him and shielded them with his body as the world turned into debris. They landed in a field of tall grass. The dust cloud was enormous. It drifted slowly under the moonlight. Silence returned to the plains. Tanjiro coughed and sat up. He was bruised but alive. He looked for the train. There was no train. There was just a long trench in the earth where the tracks used to be, and twisted wreckage scattered for miles. He saw Rengoku standing up, dusting off his haori. Rengoku was unharmed. He looked around frantically for the passengers. Miraculously, most were alive, thrown clear by the strange physics of the explosion, or shielded by the debris itself. Saitama landed on his feet a few yards away. He was holding his coupon. It was torn in half. He stared at the 2 pieces of paper with tragic eyes. He fell to his knees. He screamed a long, sorrowful no at the night sky. Rengoku approached him. The Hashira was on high alert. He had seen the punch. He knew that the destruction of the train was not caused by the demon, but by this man. Rengoku gripped his sword hilt. He asked Saitama who he was. Saitama taped the coupon back together. He stood up. He said he was Saitama. Rengoku asked what breathing style he used. Saitama looked at him and said he didn't use breathing styles, he just did push-ups. Rengoku fell silent. He was a man of logic and tradition. He knew how the world worked. Hard work, breathing techniques, and sword mastery led to power. This man defied that logic. This man was an impossibility. But the night was not over. The air temperature dropped. A pressure heavier than the train descended on the field. Tanjiro froze. He knew this smell. It was the scent of death. From the darkness of the forest, a figure emerged. He had pink hair and blue tattoos covering his body. His eyes were gold and etched with the kanji for Upper Moon 3. Akaza had arrived. He had been running for hours tracking the signature of the void he felt the previous day. He saw the wreckage of the train. He saw the weak humans. He saw the flame Hashira, whose spirit burned like a sun. And then he saw the bald man. Akaza ignored Tanjiro. He ignored the passengers. He walked straight toward the group. Rengoku stepped forward. He drew his blade. He declared that he would not let the demon hurt anyone. Akaza smiled. He complimented Rengoku's spirit. He said Rengoku was close to the realm of the highest, but he was still human. He offered to make Rengoku a demon, so they could fight for eternity. Rengoku refused instantly. He spoke of the beauty of human mortality. It was a noble speech. It was the speech of a hero ready to die for his beliefs. Akaza sighed. He said if Rengoku would not become a demon, he would have to kill him. Akaza deployed his technique, destructive death compass needle. A snowflake pattern of blue light appeared under his feet. The compass detected the fighting spirit of everyone in the vicinity. It locked onto Rengoku. It locked onto Tanjiro. But when the compass needle tried to find Saitama, it spun wildly. It could not find a target. There was no fighting spirit. There was no killing intent. There was just a man standing there looking annoyed about his clothes. Akaza found this fascinating. He launched himself at Rengoku. The speed was blinding. Rengoku met him. Flame and shock waves collided. The sound was like thunder. Tanjiro couldn't even see their movements. They were trading hundreds of blows in seconds. Rengoku was strong. He was at the peak of his power. But Akaza was stronger. He was healing faster than Rengoku could cut. He was adapting. He landed a punch on Rengoku's ribs, shattering them. Rengoku didn't flinch. He swung his sword down. Akaza caught the blade between his hands. They were deadlocked. Saitama watched the fight. He thought the special effects were okay, but the dialogue was repetitive. He saw Rengoku bleeding. He saw the young boy Tanjiro crying and trying to get up to help. Saitama didn't know these people, but he knew a hero when he saw one. Rengoku was fighting to protect the weak. Saitama respected that. He walked forward. He walked right into the middle of the deadlock. Akaza was about to deliver a killing blow to Rengoku's solar plexus. Saitama tapped Akaza on the shoulder. Akaza spun around. His reflexes were instantaneous. He swung a back fist at Saitama's head. The punch connected. It was a blow that could shatter a boulder. Saitama's head didn't move. The sound was a dull thud. Akaza's eyes widened. He looked at his hand. His knuckles were broken. He looked at Saitama. Saitama looked at him. Saitama asked him to stop bullying the loud guy. Akaza felt a sensation he hadn't felt in 100 years. Confusion. He jumped back. He regenerated his hand. He looked at the compass. It was still spinning. It said there was no enemy, but the enemy was right there. Akaza screamed. He loved this. He loved the unknown. He unleashed his strongest technique. Destructive death annihilation type. He gathered all his energy into a chaotic barrage of shock waves. He fired them at Saitama. The ground exploded. The shock waves tore up the earth, creating a crater 50 meters wide. Rengoku grabbed Tanjiro and leapt back, shielding him from the blast. The dust settled. Saitama was standing in the center of the crater. His cape was burnt. His suit was dirty. He was very angry now. He brushed the soot off his shoulder. He looked at Akaza. He said that was enough. Akaza was shaking. He was shaking with excitement and terror. He charged again. He aimed for the heart. Saitama threw a normal punch. He didn't aim. He just threw his hand forward. The air pressure in front of his fist compressed until it became a solid wall. It hit Akaza. It didn't just hit him. It erased the top half of his torso. His head, his arms and his chest were gone instantly. The shockwave continued behind him. It carved a tunnel through the forest behind the train tracks. It punched a hole through 3 consecutive mountains in the distance. The clouds in the sky parted in a massive circle, revealing the stars. The lower half of Akaza's body stood there for a second, then collapsed. Silence fell over the clearing. Rengoku lowered his sword. His eye was swollen shut. He was bleeding from his head, but he was alive. He stared at the legs of the upper moon. He stared at the hole in the mountains. His mind could not process it. The scale of the attack was beyond anything in the history of the Demon Slayer Corps. It wasn't a breathing form. It wasn't a technique. It was simply overwhelming force. Tanjiro was weeping. He didn't know why. It was the shock. Inosuke was lying on the ground, shaking, muttering impossible over and over. Saitama looked at his glove. It was smoking. He looked to the legs of the demon. He waited. He expected the demon to come back. In the canon of this world, Akaza could regenerate his head. He could overcome death through sheer will. But the damage Saitama dealt was not just physical. It was a total rejection of the demon's existence. The cells that remained were traumatized. They refused to regenerate. The trauma of the impact was so absolute that the demon's biology gave up. The legs disintegrated into ash. Akaza did not fade away with a backstory. He did not remember his past. He died before his brain could even register that he had lost. The sun began to rise. The first rays of light hit the smoke rising from the destroyed landscape. Rengoku sheathed his sword. The click was loud in the quiet morning. He walked over to Saitama. He was limping. He stopped in front of the ball man. He bowed. It was a deep bow of respect and humility. He thanked Saitama for saving the passengers and his subordinates. Saitama scratched his head. He said it was no big deal, but he was hungry. Rengoku laughed. It was a strained laugh, but it was genuine. He said he would buy Saitama as many box lunches as he wanted. But the atmosphere was not joyful. The victory was too absolute. Rengoku looked at his own hands. He had trained his whole life. He had reached the pinnacle of flame breathing, and yet he had been a bystander in the true battle. He felt a crack form in his resolve, not a break, but a fracture. He realized that the war they were fighting had just changed. They were playing with swords while a god walked among them. He looked at Tanjiro. The boy was looking at Saitama with a mix of hero worship and terror. Rengoku knew he had to report this to the master. The balance of the world was gone. The demons were no longer the apex predators, but neither were the humans. Far away in the Infinity Castle, Muzan Kibutsuji felt the death of Akaza. It was sudden. There was no transmission of memories, just a sudden silence where Upper Moon 3 used to be. Muzan dropped the glass beaker he was holding in his laboratory. It shattered. He felt a fear that made his knees weak. Akaza was one of his favorites. Akaza was a warrior who could not be killed by conventional means, and he had vanished in a split second. Muzan looked at his hands. He realized that for the first time in 1,000 years he was not the hunter. He did not know what was out there. He only knew that the sun had risen and something brighter than the sun was walking on the earth. He ordered all Upper Moons to return to the castle immediately. The hunt for the blue spider lily was cancelled. The war for survival had begun. Saitama walked with Rengoku and the boys towards the nearest town. He was complaining about the dust in his shoes. He didn't notice the way the Slayers looked at him. They looked at him like he was a bomb that could go off at any moment. The timeline had shifted. Rengoku Kyojuro was alive, but the cost was the certainty of the Demon Slayer core. They had seen the ceiling of power and it was infinite. They walked into the morning light, leaving the wreckage of the train and the mountains behind them, a monument to a power that should not exist in this world. The second major catastrophe was not a defeat. It was a victory so terrifying it felt like the end of the world. The cleanup crews, known as the Kokushi, arrived at the site of the Mugen train disaster 3 hours after sunrise. They were used to horrific scenes. They were trained to clean up blood, severed limbs, and the debris of battle so that the public remained ignorant of the war between humans and demons. But when they crested the hill and saw the valley, they stopped. There was no train. There were no tracks. There was a furrow in the earth that looked like a god had dragged a finger across the map. The metal of the locomotive had not just been derailed. It had been atomized and scattered as a fine glitter over the rice fields for miles. The Kokushi commander, a man who had served for 20 years, fell to his knees. He looked at the 3 mountains in the distance. They were no longer peaks. They were hollowed-out rings of stone, pierced by a force so focused and violent that the rock had melted into glass. This was not the work of a demon. No demon had this kind of raw kinetic output. This was not the work of a slayer. Breathing styles created illusions of elements. They did not rewrite topography. The commander ordered his men to cordon off the area, but he knew it was impossible. You could not hide a missing mountain range. The secret war was bleeding into reality. Gyojuro Rengoku, walked ahead of the cart carrying the injured passengers. He refused to ride. His ribs were healing, wrapped tightly in bandages, and his eye was covered, but he walked with a stiff, mechanical gait. He was the flame Hashira, a beacon of confidence, but the fire in his spirit was flickering. He kept looking back at the bald man walking behind the cart. Saitama was eating a persimmon he had found on a tree. He looked completely average. He slouched. He had no guard up. Yet Rengoku had seen him erase Upper Moon 3 with a motion that looked like he was swatting a fly. Rengoku gripped his sword handle. The wood felt foreign in his hand. He had spent a lifetime mastering the blade, honing his spirit, pushing his body to the absolute limit of human potential. He believed that through hard work, a human could stand against demons. Last night, that belief had been shattered. It wasn't that Saitama was strong. It was that Saitama made strength irrelevant. The gap between Rengoku and Akaza was a canyon. The gap between Akaza and Saitama was a universe. Rengoku felt a cold dread settling in his gut. If such power existed, what was the point of the Demon Slayer Corps? What was the point of their sacrifice? They arrived at the Butterfly Mansion in the late afternoon. Shinobu Kocho, the insect Hashira, was waiting at the gate. She had received the crow's message, but the message had been incoherent. It spoke of mountains vanishing and upper moons disintegrating. She expected it to be hysteria. When she saw the condition of the survivors, she went into triage mode. She directed the Kokushi to take the injured to the wards. She saw Rengoku. She saw the bruising, the broken ribs, the shattered eye socket. She knew instantly he had fought an upper moon, and he was alive. This alone was a miracle. But then she saw the stranger. Saitama was standing by the gate, poking a hole in the paper lantern with his finger. He looked bored. Shinobu approached him with her trademark smile, a mask that hid her perpetual anger. She asked him who he was. Saitama looked at her. He asked if this was a hospital and if they had a cafeteria. Shinobu paused. She sensed nothing from him. No drive, no malice, no power. He felt like a civilian. But Rengoku stepped between them. He told Shinobu to treat this man with the utmost caution. He told her that this man had killed Upper Moon 3. Shinobu's smile froze. She looked at the bald head. She looked at the yellow suit. She laughed. She thought Rengoku had taken a blow to the head. But Rengoku did not laugh. His one good eye was deadly serious. Saitama was taken to an examination room. Shinobu wanted to test him. She was a scientist. She needed to understand. She asked for a blood sample. Saitama agreed, mostly because she promised him juice afterwards. Shinobu took a syringe. She aimed for the vein in his arm. She pushed the needle. The needle bent. It curled up like a piece of soft wire. Shinobu frowned. She fetched a stronger needle, one made of modified steel used for penetrating demon hide. She tried again. The needle snapped in half. The tip flew across the room and embedded itself in the wall. Saitama watched her. He apologized, saying he had tough skin. Shinobu stared at the broken needle. Her hands began to tremble. She was the poison expert. Her entire fighting style relied on piercing skin to deliver wisteria toxin. If she could not pierce him, she could not hurt him. She realized with a sudden suffocating panic that if this man decided to kill everyone in the mansion, there was absolutely nothing she could do to stop him. He was a biological fortress. She asked him to open his mouth. She checked his teeth. They were normal. She checked his reflexes. She tapped his knee with a rubber hammer. His leg kicked up so fast it created a sonic boom in the small room. The shockwave shattered all the medicine bottles on the shelves. Glass rained down. The windows blew out. Shinobu was thrown against the wall. Saitama held his juice box, which had not spilled a drop. He said, "Oops." The emergency Hashira meeting was called for that night. The Ubuyashiki estate was quiet. The sand garden raked into perfect ripples, but the air was heavy with impending violence. Kagaya Ubuyashiki sat on the porch, his illness having progressed, bandages covering more of his face. But he was smiling. He felt the shift in the wind. The Hashira gathered in the courtyard. Sanemi Shinazugawa, the wind, Hashira, was pacing like a caged wolf. Iguro Abane was perched in a tree, his snake agitated. Mitsuri Kanroji was blushing, confused by the report. Gyomei Himejima stood like a statue, tears streaming down his face, praying for the souls of the departed and the confusion of the living. Kiyu Tomioka stood apart, silent as always. Rengoku stood in the center, flanked by Saitama. Saitama was sitting cross-legged on the pebbles, picking at a loose thread on his cape. He looked completely out of place among the colorful, intense warriors. Kagaya spoke. His voice was a soothing balm, a specific tone that put people at ease. He welcomed Saitama. He thanked him for saving the lives of his children. Saitama nodded and said it was fine, but he asked if he could go home now because he didn't have a change of clothes. Sanemi snapped. The disrespect was too much. He marched over to Saitama. He demanded to know what kind of trickery he used. He didn't believe the report. He didn't believe a bald peasant killed an upper moon. He thought Saitama was a fraud, or worse, a demon in disguise. Sanemi drew his sword. It was a green Nichiren blade, sharp enough to slice the wind itself. He aimed the tip at Saitama's throat. He threatened to carve the truth out of him. Rengoku shouted for him to stop, but Sanemi was faster. He thrust the blade. Saitama didn't dodge. He just bit the blade. He caught the steel between his teeth. There was a loud crunch. Sanemi froze. He pulled back, but the sword wouldn't move. Saitama bit down. The top half of the Nichiren blade shattered into metal shards. Saitama spit the tip of the sword onto the ground. He looked at Sanemi. He said that was dangerous and he could have poked an eye out. The courtyard went silent. Sanemi looked at his broken sword. This was a weapon forged by the finest smiths, imbued with the power of the sun. And this man had eaten it. Iguro dropped from the tree, his eyes wide. Gyomei stopped praying. Giyu's expression finally changed. His eyes widened slightly, which was the equivalent of a scream for him. Kagaya laughed softly. It was a sound of pure relief. He told the Hashira to stand down. He explained that they were looking at a singularity, a being that existed outside the logic of their world. He asked Saitama if he would help them. He explained the war. He explained Muzan. He explained that innocent people were being eaten every night. Saitama listened. He scratched his head. He said he was a hero, so he guessed he could help if it didn't take too long. But he had a condition. He wanted a map to the city and a salary so he could buy groceries. Kagaya agreed instantly. He offered to pay Saitama whatever he wanted. Saitama asked for enough to buy the premium hot pot beef. The Hashira were dumbfounded. They were offering him the resources of the Ubuyashiki family, and he wanted beef. Meanwhile, reality was bending in the Infinity Castle. The dimensional fortress was usually a place of silence and order, controlled by the Biwa demon Nakime. But tonight, the rooms were shifting erratically. Nakime was nervous. Her fear was transmitting into the architecture. Muzan Kibutsuji stood on a platform that defied gravity, looking down at his remaining upper moons. The meeting was missing Akaza. The empty space where he usually stood felt like a gaping wound. Kokushibo, upper moon 1, stood with his 6 eyes narrowed. He felt the absence of his rival. He asked what had happened. Muzan did not turn around. His voice was a low hiss, vibrating with a terror he could barely suppress. He told them Akaza was dead. He told them he was obliterated in a single instant. He told them the enemy was not a slayer. Doma, Upper Moon 2, fanned himself and giggled. He asked if it was a new pillar. He said he would love to meet them and eat them. Muzan turned. His eyes were vertical slits of rage. He backhanded Doma. The force took Doma's head off. Doma regenerated instantly, still smiling, but he fell silent. Muzan ordered them to listen. He said there was a human who broke the laws of physics. He described the bald man. He forbade them from engaging him. He said that if they saw a bald man in a yellow suit, they were to run. They were to hide. They were to abandon their posts and survive. This order shocked the Upper Moons. They were the apex predators. They had never been told to run from a human. Kokushibo stepped forward. He said he was a samurai. He would not run from a battle. Muzan looked at him. He said that if Kokushibo fought this man, he would not die like a warrior. He would be erased like a drawing on a chalkboard. Muzan's fear was contagious. The demons felt it in their blood. The link they shared with their master was flooding them with images of a fist that filled the sky. Muzan changed the strategy. The direct war was over. He could not win a contest of force. He needed to be smarter. He ordered Gyoko and Huntengu to the villages in the north. He told them to start turning humans into demons en masse, not for quality, but for quantity. He wanted to create a swarm. He wanted to create chaos so widespread that the slayers would be stretched thin, and while they were distracted, he would focus all his resources on finding the blue spider lily. He needed to conquer the sun. If he could conquer the sun, he could become immortal truly. He believed that even this bald monster could not kill a being that was truly immortal. Or perhaps he could absorb the man. If he could get a drop of Saitama's blood, maybe he could evolve. Muzan retreated to his laboratory. He began to mix chemicals frantically. He was no longer the arrogant king. He was a cornered rat, and that made him infinitely more dangerous. Back at the Slayer headquarters, the integration of Saitama was proving difficult. He was given a room in the butterfly mansion. He was given a uniform, but he refused to wear it, insisting on washing and repairing his yellow suit. The Kakushi tried to fix it for him, but the fabric was a synthetic weave they didn't understand. Aoi Kanzaki tried to get him to follow the rehabilitation regimen. She yelled at him to stretch. Saitama did a stretch and accidentally split the floorboards of the dojo. The three young slayers, Tanjiro, Zenitsu, and Inosuke, were recovering in the beds next door. They watched Saitama with awe. Tanjiro was the most affected. He approached Saitama one morning while Saitama was reading a manga he found. Tanjiro bowed until his head hit the floor. He asked Saitama to teach him. He wanted to be strong enough to protect his sister. He wanted to know the secret. Saitama looked at the boy with the kind eyes and the scar. He sighed. He put down the manga. He told Tanjiro the secret. He said, 100 push-ups, 100 sit-ups, 100 squats, and a 10 kilometers run every single day, and no air conditioning in the summer or heat in the winter. Tanjiro blinked. He waited for the rest. He waited for the secret breathing technique, the spiritual revelation. Saitama said that was it. Tanjiro looked at him. He said that was just normal strength training. It wasn't even that intense compared to what the Hashira did. Saitama shrugged. He said it worked for him. Tanjiro felt a wave of despair. He realized that Saitama didn't know why he was strong. He was a phenomenon without an explanation. This was harder to accept than a magic spell. It meant the path to that power was closed to everyone else. The tension in the core began to fester. The lower-ranked slayers heard rumors of the god of destruction who had joined them. Some stopped training. They said, what was the point if one man could do it all? Others became reckless, thinking Saitama would save them. The discipline that held the organization together was fraying. Sanemi and Obanai were furious. They felt their life's work being mocked. They decided to challenge Saitama again, not to a fight, but to a contest of skill. They set up an obstacle course in the forest. Traps, logs, swinging blades. They challenged Saitama to run it. Saitama did. He ran through it in a straight line. He didn't jump over the obstacles. He ran through the trees, through the rocks, through the traps. He left a tunnel of destruction behind him. He finished in 2 seconds. He asked if there was a prize. Sanemi threw his wooden sword on the ground and walked away. He went to the forest to scream. He chopped down trees for hours until his hands bled. He couldn't process it. But the world outside did not wait for them to adjust. The escalation Muzan ordered began. Reports came in from the north. Entire villages were disappearing. Not just people, but buildings. Gyoko, Upper Moon 5, was creating art out of the corpses. Hunting was spreading fear. The attacks were happening simultaneously in 10 different locations. The crows were flying frantically, delivering messages of doom. Kagaya Ubuyashiki realized Muzan's play. He was stress-testing the new defense. He was seeing if Saitama could be everywhere at once. He couldn't. Saitama was one man. He had no travel speed other than running. He couldn't fly. He couldn't teleport. Kagaya summoned the Hashira. He divided them into teams. He had to deploy them to stop the bleeding. He turned to Saitama. He gave him a specific mission. He sent him to the Yoshiwara Entertainment District. Rumors of a high-level demon were there. It was Upper Moon 6, Daki, and Gyutaro. Kagaya knew this was a risk. If Muzan was hiding his pieces, Yoshiwara was the perfect place for a trap. But he needed to clear the board of the upper moons to force Muzan out. He assigned Uzui Tengen, the sound Hashira, to guide Saitama. Tengen was flamboyant. He was excited. He had heard the stories. He wanted to see the flashiness of this bald man. Tengen and Saitama walked towards the City of Lights. Tengen was dressed in his ninja garb, diamonds studded in his headband. Saitama was wearing his yellow suit, which he had finally patched with a piece of cloth that didn't match the color. It looked terrible. Tengen critiqued his fashion sense the entire way. He told Saitama he had no style. Saitama ignored him. He was looking at the roadside stalls. He wanted a steamed bun. As they entered Yoshiwara, the atmosphere changed. The scent of perfume and powder masked the smell of rotting flesh. Daki was hiding in the Kyogoku house. She had received Muzan's order to run. She was packing her things. She was terrified, but her brother, Gyutaro, was inside her. He was angry. He didn't want to run. He was the envious one. He wanted to kill the man who scared the master. He whispered in her ear. He told her they could take him. They could use the hostages. They could use the city. The siblings argued. This hesitation was fatal. Saitama walked down the main street. The crowds parted. He didn't blend in. He looked like a thumb in a jewelry box. Tengen was using his shinobi skills to gather intel. He appeared next to Saitama on a roof. He pointed to the Kyogoku house. He said the demon was there. He told Saitama to be stealthy. He told him to go in undercover. Saitama nodded. He walked to the front door of the brothel. He knocked. The door opened. A woman looked at him. Saitama asked if the demon was home. Tengen face-palmed on the roof. Suddenly, sashes of obi fabric exploded from the building. They were sharp as razors. They sliced through the walls and aimed for the civilians on the street. Daki had panicked. She attacked to create a distraction so she could flee. Tengen dropped down, his twin cleavers spinning, cutting the sashes to protect the people. He shouted at Saitama to move. Saitama saw a sash coming towards a young girl. He stepped on it. The sash stopped. Daki, inside the building, pulled. It wouldn't move. It felt like it was pinned by a mountain. She pulled harder. Saitama yanked the sash. Daki was ripped through the roof, through the second floor, and out onto the street. She landed face first in the dirt. She looked up, her beautiful face twisted in rage. She screamed, and then the ground erupted. Gyutaro burst out of her back, sickles flying, poison dripping. He was fast. He aimed for Saitama's eyes. Tengen shouted a warning about the poison. Gyutaro's sickle hit Saitama's forehead. The sickle chipped. Gyutaro froze. He looked at the bald man. Saitama looked at the ugly, emaciated demon. He saw the tragedy in the creature's form, but he also saw the intent to kill. Saitama raised his hand, but before he could strike, a massive explosion rocked the city. It wasn't the demons. It was something else. From the shadows of the alleyways, strange figures emerged. They were not demons. They were humans. But they were wrong. Their skin was purple, their veins bulging black. They were foaming at the mouth. They threw themselves at civilians, biting and tearing. These were the result of Muzan's experiments in the north. He had found a way to weaponize his blood into a volatile gas. He had turned the population of a nearby district into mindless ghouls and released them into Yoshiwara to create chaos. The city turned into hell in seconds. Fire spread. People screamed. Saitama looked at the chaos. He looked at Gyutaro, who was laughing. The demon shouted that this was the master's plan, to turn the humans against themselves. Saitama felt a rare flash of irritation. He didn't like it when things got messy. He didn't like it when innocent people got hurt. He looked at Tengen. He told the flashy guy to handle the zombies. He said he would handle the siblings. Tengen nodded, a grim smile on his face. He trusted this strange man. Saitama turned back to Gyutaro. The Upper Moon 6 summoned a tornado of blood slashes. It was a technique that could level a block, rotating blood scythes. The red blades spun towards Saitama. Saitama took a deep breath. He shouted, not a word, just a loud, "Hey!" The shockwave of his voice hit the blood tornado. It blew the technique away. It blew the roof off the brothel. It stripped the clothes off the demons. It cleared the sky of clouds. Gyutaro and Daki were left standing naked and shivering in the wind. Saitama walked up to them. He raised a fist. He said serious series, serious bonk. He brought his fist down on top of their heads. It wasn't a punch to destroy the earth. It was a controlled impact. It drove both demons into the ground, burying them 10 meters deep in the solid rock. Their heads were crushed. Their bodies were flattened. They died instantly. They didn't have time to argue. They didn't have time to make up. They were just gone. The vibration of the bonk traveled through the city. It knocked the ghouls off their feet. It put out the fires by displacing the oxygen. Silence returned to the entertainment district. Tengen stood amidst the unconscious ghouls. He looked at the hole in the street where the upper moons used to be. He looked at Saitama, who was dusting off his gloves. Tengen felt a mix of elation and inadequacy. He realized he was witnessing the end of an era. The age of shinobi and samurai was over. The age of the Caped Baldy had begun. But in the shadows of the Infinity Castle, Muzan smiled. He had sacrificed the siblings, but he had gotten what he wanted. His spies had collected a sample of the air from the battle. He had data. He knew that Saitama held back to protect the city. He had a weakness. He cared about the ants, and Muzan knew exactly how to exploit that. The real war was about to begin. The belt buckle broke with a small metallic ping that sounded pathetic in the silence of the Butterfly Mansion dojo. Saitama looked down at his waist. The gold-colored buckle of his hero suit had snapped in half. It was old metal fatigued by years of poverty and constant battles. To anyone else, this would be a minor annoyance, but to Saitama it was a crisis. He held his pants up with one hand and stared at the broken piece of metal on the floor. He let out a groan that was deeper and more filled with despair than the sound he made when the meteor hit Z City. Tanjiro Kamado, who was recovering from his injuries in the next room, heard the sound and rushed in expecting an attack. He saw the strongest being in the universe clutching his trousers. Saitama looked at the boy and asked if there was a tailor nearby who could weld cheap metal. Tanjiro hesitated. He knew the uniform of a slayer was made of special fabric, but he did not know about belt buckles. He suggested the swordsmith village. He explained that the smiths there were masters of metal and could forge anything. Saitama's eyes lit up. He imagined a legendary smith forging him a buckle that would never break. He decided immediately he would go to the village. This decision was the pebble that started the avalanche. Kagaya Ubuyashiki received the request. He was sitting in the dark, his illness now consuming most of his body. He considered the request. The swordsmith village was the most secret location in the core. Its location was hidden to prevent the demons from cutting off the supply of Nichiren swords. Sending Saitama there was a risk, but also a security measure. If Saitama was there, the village would be invincible. Kagaya agreed. He did not foresee that by moving his rook to defend a pawn, he was leaving the king exposed. He issued the order. Saitama would be escorted to the village. The Hashira were redeployed to cover the gap, but the coordination took time. The grid of protection around the Ubuyashiki estate thinned for a window of 12 hours. Saitama was carried to the village. In the traditional manner, plug nose and earplugs and blindfold passed between Kokushi, so no one knew the whole route. He found this incredibly annoying. He felt like a piece of luggage. When he finally arrived in the hidden valley, it was dusk. The village was peaceful, filled with the sound of hammers hitting metal and the smell of sulfur from the hot springs. He was greeted by the village chief. Saitama held out his broken belt buckle. The chief looked at it. It was made of cheap alloy. The chief was insulted. He told Saitama they only forged the soul of the steel, not garment accessories. Saitama argued. He said a belt was essential for a hero's dignity. While they argued, a pot in the corner of the room wobbled. Gyoko, Upper Moon 5, had been infiltrating the village for weeks. He moved through pots, teleporting between vessels looking for the right moment to strike. He had not expected the bald man. Muzan had warned them to run, but Gyoko was arrogant. He was an artist. He believed his art transcended physical force. He saw the man distracted by an argument about a belt. He saw an opening. He emerged from the pot. His body was a twisted mass of small arms and scales, his eyes displaced on his face. He summoned his minions, fish-like monstrosities that spat poison needles. He intended to massacre the smith silently. Saitama turned his head. He saw the fish monster. He slapped it. The fish exploded, covering the village chief in slime. Gyoko froze. He had not even seen the movement. Saitama looked at the upper moon. He asked if this was the guy who broke the pots, because that was vandalism. Gyoko shrieked. He unleashed his blood demon art. 10,000 gliding clay fish. Thousands of carnivorous fish summoned from jars swarmed the room. They filled the air with gnashing teeth. Saitama didn't move. He took a deep breath and blew. The air pressure from his exhalation created a hurricane inside the house. The fish were blown backward with such force that they turned into paste against the far wall. The wooden walls of the house blew out. The roof flew off and landed in the hot spring down the valley. Gyoko was stripped of his scales by the wind. He stood there naked and slimy, a shriveled eel of a creature. Saitama walked up to him. He poked Gyoko in the eyes. Gyoko died from the shock to his brain before his body hit the floor. But the noise of the destruction masked the real threat. High above on the cliff, Hantengu Upper Moon 4 looked down. He was trembling. He was the coward demon. He saw what happened to Gyoko. He knew he could not fight that. But he had his orders. If the bald man was in the village, he was to keep him there. Distract him. Hantengu jumped down. He split his emotions. Sekido, Karaku, Aizetsu, and Urogi materialized. They were the manifestations of anger, pleasure, sorrow, and joy. They combined into Zohokuten, the hatred demon. A massive wooden dragon rose from the earth surrounding the village. Zohokuten commanded the wood to crush the buildings. He wasn't trying to kill Saitama. He was trying to bury the village so Saitama would have to dig them out. It was a stalling tactic. Saitama saw the wooden dragons crushing the forge. He saw the smiths running. He saw the young mist Hashira Muchiro Tokito trying to cut the wood, but being overwhelmed by the sheer mass of the attack. Saitama got annoyed. He didn't like it when people broke things he needed. He wanted his belt fixed. He jumped. He launched himself into the air. He went higher than the clouds. He looked down at the valley. He saw the wooden dragon wrapped around the village like a parasite. He clenched his fist. He calculated the force needed to destroy the demon, but not the village. He decided to use the air pressure again. He punched the air above the village. Serious series, serious table flip, air variant. The atmosphere crashed down. It hit the valley floor like a hammer of God. The wooden dragon was pulverized instantly. The vibrations traveled into the earth and pulverized the main body of Hantengu, hiding deep underground. The demon didn't just die. He was erased from the biological record. The shockwave flattened the forest for 10 miles in a perfect circle. But the village in the center was untouched, sitting in the eye of the storm. The smiths looked up. The sky was clear. The demons were gone. Saitama landed softly. He held up his pants. He asked if the forge was still open. While Saitama was saving the village, a nightmare was unfolding 300 miles away. The decision to send Saitama away had left a hole in the defense of the Ubuyashiki estate. Muzan Kibutsuji had not sent the upper moons to the village to win. He sent them to die. He sent them to buy him 1 hour, and in that hour he made his move. He did not go himself. He sent the one monster he knew could execute a tactical strike without fail. Kokushibo, Upper Moon 1, the brother of Yoriichi, the strongest swordsman in the history of demons. The alarm bells at the estate did not ring because Kokushibo moved faster than sound. He appeared at the front gate. The Kakushi guards fell into pieces before they saw him draw his sword. Sanemi Shinazugawa was the first to respond. The wind. Hashira burst from the shadows, his eyes bloodshot with rage. He swung his blade at the intruder. Kokushibo did not block. He stepped slightly to the left. Sanemi's sword cut air. Kokushibo's sword, a fleshy blade covered in eyes, flashed. Sanemi felt a cold line across his chest. He looked down. He was cut from his shoulder to hip. It wasn't deep enough to kill instantly, but it was deep enough to incapacitate. Sanemi coughed blood and fell. He couldn't believe it. He couldn't track the speed. Gyome Himejima arrived next. The stone Hashira was the strongest of the human warriors. He swung his massive flail and axe. The weapon roared through the air. Kokushibo looked at the blind monk. He felt a flicker of respect. This human was peak. Kokushibo drew his breath. Moon breathing. First form, dark moon, evening palace. Dozens of chaotic crescent moon blades erupted from his swing. They clashed with Gyomei's axe. Sparks flew. The ground was shredded. Gyomei held his ground, but he was bleeding from 100 small cuts. He realized with a sinking heart that he was outclassed. This was not a demon relying on tricks. This was a master swordsman with 400 years of experience and supernatural stat. Giyu Tomioka joined the fray. The three Hashira formed a perimeter around the master's house. They were the wall, but the wall was crumbling. Kokushibo moved like liquid moonlight. He parried Giyu, kicked Sanemi, and slashed Gyomei in a single fluid motion. He spoke calmly. He told them their struggle was admirable but futile. He told them that the era of slayers was over. He wasn't playing with them like Akaza. He was executing them. He raised his sword to decapitate Gyomei. Then the house exploded. Kagaya Ubuyashiki had detonated the trap. He knew they couldn't win. He knew Saitama was too far away. He sacrificed himself, his wife, and his 2 older daughters. The estate turned into a fireball. The explosion was filled with spikes and poison. It engulfed Kokushibo. The Hashira were thrown back by the blast. They watched the fire burning. They hoped. They prayed that the master's final gambit had worked. From the flames, Kokushibo walked out. He was burned. His flesh was bubbling. But he was regenerating. He looked annoyed. The trap had surprised him, but it had not killed him. He looked at the burning ruins. The master was dead. The head of the snake was cut off. Mission accomplished. But Muzan wanted total erasure. Kokushibo turned his 6 eyes to the injured Hashira. He prepared to finish them. Suddenly, a sonic boom tore through the sky. It wasn't a plane. It was a man running. Saitama had finished his business at the village. He had sensed the vibration of the explosion through the earth. He ran back. He didn't take the roads. He ran in a straight line through the mountains. He arrived at the estate in 4 minutes. He stopped in the courtyard. The ground smoked under his feet from the friction of his braking. He saw the burning house. He saw the master dead. He saw Sanemi and Gyomei bleeding on the ground. He saw the 6-eyed samurai standing over them. Saitama dropped the paper bag holding his newly welded belt buckle. The bag hit the ground. The sound was the only thing audible in the roaring fire. Saitama's face was in shadow. He didn't look bored. He didn't look annoyed. For the first time since arriving in this universe, he looked disappointed. He looked at Kokushibo. He asked if the samurai did this. Kokushibo looked at the newcomer. His instincts, honed over centuries, screamed at him. Every cell in his body yelled death. He saw the image of Yorichi overlaid on the bald man, but Yorichi was a sun, and this man was a black hole. Kokushibo did not speak. He attacked. Moon breathing, 16th form, moonbow, half moon. He swung his sword, creating a cataclysmic barrage of giant crescent blades that fell from the sky like orbital strikes. The attack pulverized the entire estate grounds. The earth was chewed up into dust. The Hashira covered their heads, expecting death. The dust cleared. Saitama was standing in the same spot. His clothes were shredded. His yellow suit was in tatters, but his skin was untouched. He held the blade of Kokushibo's sword. He had caught it, not with his teeth this time, with his hand. He gripped the flesh blade. He squeezed. The sword screamed. It was a living thing and it felt pain. Saitama crushed the sword into pulp. Kokushibo stepped back, his eyes wide with shock. He tried to regenerate the blade, but the cells refused. They were terrified. Saitama walked forward. He didn't punch. He slapped. He slapped Kokushibo across the face. It was the serious slap. The force of the slap disconnected Kokushibo's head from his body, but it didn't stop there. It disconnected his soul from the cycle of reincarnation. The shockwave vaporized the upper half of the demon's body and continued traveling. It parted the flames of the burning estate. It extinguished the fire instantly by removing the air. It traveled across the forest and carved a canyon 20 miles long into the geography of Japan. Kokushibo's legs fell over. The strongest upper moon was dead, but the victory was hollow. Saitama looked at the ruins. He looked at the bodies of the Ubuyashiki family. He looked at the injured Hashira. He realized that while he was arguing about a belt, the people who fed him and gave him a home were slaughtered. He felt a heavy weight in his chest. It was guilt. He had the power to save everyone, but he wasn't there. He had made a choice to be petty, and the cost was paid by others. Sanemi tried to stand up. He vomited blood. He looked at Saitama. He didn't scream at him this time. He didn't curse him. He just looked at him with empty eyes. The master was gone. The core was decapitated. The sanctuary was destroyed. Muzan had traded his bishops for the opponent's king. It was a strategic checkmate. Saitama stood amidst the ashes holding his broken belt. He realized that being a hero for fun wasn't working in this world. This world didn't need a hero for fun. It needed a hero who paid attention. The surviving pillars gathered. The mood was funereal. There were no orders. No crows were flying. The chain of command was broken. Kiriya Ubuyashiki, the young son of the master, stepped out from the safe room. Beneath the ruins, he was covered in soot. He was trembling. He was now the head of the corps. He was 8 years old. He looked at the devastation. He looked at Saitama. He didn't cry. He bowed. He thanked Saitama for saving the Hashira. His voice broke the silence. It was a sound of such crushing maturity that it hurt to listen to. Saitama clenched his fist. The metal buckle in his hand bent like clay. He looked at the boy. He knelt down so he was eye level with the child. He promised him. He said he would end it. He said he wouldn't go shopping. He wouldn't look for sales. He would go find the guy in the suit and he would punch him. It wasn't a boast. It was a statement of fact. Far away in the Infinity Castle, Muzan felt the death of Kokushibo. He felt the connection snap. He was alone now. All the upper moons were gone. Nakime was the only one left holding the castle together. Muzan should have been terrified. He had lost his army. He had lost his strongest guardian. But he smiled. He held a vial of blue liquid in his hand. While the chaos unfolded, his spies had found it. The blue spider lily. It had been growing near the grave of Yorichi's wife, a place no demon dared to go until the balance of the world was broken by Saitama. The disruption of nature caused by Saitama's arrival had caused the flowers to bloom early. Muzan drank the liquid. His body began to convulse. He fell to the floor. His cells tore apart and rebuilt themselves. He screamed in agony and ecstasy. The sunlight weakness was fading. He was becoming the perfect being. He sensed Saitama's resolve. He sensed the hero coming for him. Muzan laughed. Let him come. The game had changed again. Muzan was no longer a demon. He was a god, and a god does not fear a man in a cape. The demon slayer core was broken. Their leader was dead. Their base was gone. Their strongest warriors were crippled, and the enemy had just achieved his ultimate goal. The final confrontation would not be a war. It would be a duel between two beings who had transcended their universes. Saitama stood up and turned toward the rising sun. For the first time in his life, he was not looking for a fight to cure his boredom. He was looking for a fight to set things right. The serious era had begun. The sun rose over Tokyo, but it brought no hope because the city was being devoured by a nightmare of geometry and flesh. The Infinity Castle was no longer a hidden dimension. It had breached the barrier of reality and was overwriting the capital of Japan. Massive wooden platforms floated in the sky, crushing skyscrapers like cardboard boxes. Shoji doors the size of city blocks opened in the air, releasing torrents of low-level demons that flooded the streets. The laws of gravity were suspended. Trains derailed and fell upwards into the abyss of the castle. The panic was absolute. Millions of people were trapped in a labyrinth that defied physics. In the center of the chaos, floating above the ruin of the imperial palace, stood Muzan Kibutsuji. He was no longer the pale man in the suit. He had shed his human disguise. He was a being of pure white, glowing with a terrifying bioluminescence. His hair flowed like liquid starlight. He did not burn in the sun. He drank it. The ultraviolet rays that had terrified him for a millennium now fueled his cells, making him stronger with every passing second. He had consumed the blue spider lily, and he had evolved. He was the perfect organism. Kiriya Ubuyashiki sat in the temporary command center, a tent erected on a hill overlooking the burning city. He was weeping blood. The map on the table before him was useless. The enemy was not moving troops, he was moving the world. Kiriya held the communication talisman. He ordered the final charge. It was a suicide order, and he knew it. The remaining demon slayers gathered from all corners of the country were to assault the floating castle. They were ants attacking a storm, but they had no choice. If they did not stop Muzan now, humanity would become cattle. Tanjiro Kamado ran across the rooftops of the distorting city. His sword was drawn, his breath was fire. He was exhausted. He had not slept since the destruction of the Ubuyashiki estate. Beside him ran Zenitsu Agatsuma, who was crying and screaming, but moving at the speed of lightning. Inosuke Hashibira was laughing a manic sound of pure adrenaline, dual-wielding his chipped blades. They were the spearhead. Behind them came the surviving Hashira. Giyu Tomioka looked like a ghost, his eyes dead and focused. Kanroji Misuri was shouting encouragement that sounded like pleas. Obanai Ikuro moved like a shadow, his snake hissing. Shinobu Kocho was pale, her poison useless against a god, but she ran anyway. They jumped from debris to debris, ascending the chaotic architecture of the castle towards the central platform, where Muzan waited. Nakime, the Biwa demon, sat high in the structure protected by layers of shifting rooms. She played her instrument and the city twisted. A highway folded in half, crushing a battalion of police. A skyscraper turned into a spear and impaled a group of slayers. She was the conductor of the apocalypse. She saw the ants climbing. She struck a chord. The platform the slayers were running on flipped upside down. Gravity reversed. Tanjiro fell towards the sky. He dug his sword into the wood, screaming. He swung himself up. He saw his friends dangling over the infinite drop. This was not a battle. It was an execution. Muzan watched them from his throne of flesh. He smiled. It was a benevolent smile which made it more terrifying. He spoke, and his voice was amplified by the architectures of the castle booming across the entire city. He told them to give up. He told them that death was a gift he was willing to share. He raised his hand. Hundreds of dragons made of bone and muscle erupted from his back. They were not the whips of the past. These were independent organisms with eyes and mouths. They dove towards the slayers. Giyu and Sanemi, who had dragged himself from his sickbed to join the fight, intercepted the first wave. Wind and water breathing clashed with the bone dragons. They cut and slashed, their techniques perfect, their resolve absolute. But for every dragon they cut, two more grew in its place. Muzan was not using energy. He was creating matter. He was infinite. One of the bone dragons smashed Sanemi into a floating wall. He coughed blood, his ribs shattering again. He tried to stand, but the gravity pinned him. Muzan laughed. He pointed a finger at Tanjiro. A beam of concentrated cellular energy fired from his tip, It was a death ray that decomposed matter on contact. Tanjiro saw the light. He couldn't dodge. He braced himself to die. He thought of his sister Nezuko, who was hidden far away. He apologized to her. The beam hit, but Tanjiro did not die. The beam did not hit him. It hit a red glove. Saitama stood in front of Tanjiro. He was holding his hand up, palm open. Smoke curled from his glove. He had caught the death ray. He closed his hand, crushing the energy into a small ball of light that fizzled out. He looked at his glove. It was blackened. He sighed. He said that was the second time this week someone tried to ruin his clothes. He looked at Tanjiro. He asked the boy if he was okay. Tanjiro stared. He couldn't speak. He just pointed at Muzan. Saitama turned to face the demon god. He stood on the floating platform, his white cape fluttering in the updraft of the burning city. He looked small compared to the scale of the castle. He looked mundane compared to the divine horror of Muzan. But his presence stabilized the reality around him. The wood stopped shifting under his feet. The gravity normalized. He was a fixed point in a broken world. Muzan looked at Saitama. The smile faded. His cells remembered the fear of the other demons. His genetic memory screamed that this was the predator, but his new mind, the mind of a god, rejected the fear. He was perfect. He had conquered the sun. He could not be beaten by a human. He stood up. He told Saitama he was late. He said he had already won. Saitama scratched his ear. He said he got lost because the streets kept moving. He said it was very annoying, and he wanted to file a noise complaint about the loud music. Muzan's eyes narrowed. He decided to end it quickly. He didn't want to fight. He wanted an erasure. He manipulated the castle. The entire structure folded inward. Billions of tons of wood and stone collapsed towards Saitama. It was a crushing sphere the size of a mountain. It slammed shut with a sound that shattered windows 10 miles away. The slayers watched in horror. The hero was buried. Muzan sat back down. He thought it was over. He turned his attention back to the slayers. But then the sphere of debris began to rumble. Cracks appeared on the surface. Bright red light shone through the cracks. The sphere exploded. It didn't break apart. It burst outward as if a bomb had gone off inside. The debris was vaporized. Saitama stood in the center, dusting off his shoulders. He looked irritated. He said he hated being covered in dust. Muzan stood up again. His confidence wavered. He realized physical mass was useless. He switched to biological warfare. He released a cloud of neurotoxin so potent it could kill a whale in a microsecond. The purple fog enveloped Saitama. The slayers covered their mouths and retreated, but the gas was everywhere. Saitama breathed it in. He coughed. He waved his hand in front of his face. He said it smelled like rotten eggs. His immune system didn't just fight the poison, it ignored it. His cells were too dense and too stubborn to acknowledge the existence of the toxin. Muzan screamed. It was a sound of frustration. He launched himself at Saitama. He moved faster than teleportation. He was everywhere at once, striking from all angles with blades that could cut through diamond. Saitama didn't dodge. He took the hits. The blades struck his head, his chest, his arms. They shattered. Sparks flew like fireworks. Muzan's attacks were breaking against the indestructible wall of Saitama's boredom. Saitama caught one of Muzan's bone whips. He yanked it. Muzan was pulled forward off balance. Saitama punched him in the stomach. It was a normal punch, but it connected with the force of a tectonic plate shift. Muzan's perfect body bent double. His eyes popped out. He vomited a torrent of blood and internal organs. He was launched backward, crashing through 10 layers of the castle. He hit the ground of the real Tokyo, creating a crater that swallowed a district. The slayers cheered. They cried out in relief. But the battle was not over. From the crater, a pillar of flesh erupted. Muzan rose. He was regenerating, but he was changing. The damage from the punch had traumatized his cells. They were evolving to counter the force. He grew larger. He became a monstrosity of muscle and armor, a kaiju of pure hate. He absorbed the rubble around him. He absorbed the demons he had spawned. He grew to the size of a skyscraper. He roared and the sound wave leveled buildings. He was no longer trying to be a god. He was a beast of survival. Saitama jumped down from the floating debris. He landed on the edge of the crater. He looked up at the giant Muzan. He said the monster looked like a mess. Muzan looked down. He raised a foot the size of a stadium to stomp the ant. Saitama raised a hand. He caught the foot. The ground cracked under him, but he didn't budge. He held the millions of tons of monster with one arm. He looked at his watch. He realized he was going to miss the evening news. He decided to get serious. He pushed the foot back. The giant Muzan toppled over, crashing into the ruins of the castle. Saitama jumped into the air. He hovered there for a second, silhouetted against the sun. He clenched his right fist. The air around him distorted. The atmosphere screamed as it was compressed. He pulled his arm back. Serious series, serious punch. He threw the punch. He didn't hit Muzan directly. He hit the air in front of Muzan. The shockwave was a visible beam of kinetic energy. It hit the monster. Muzan's regeneration factor tried to activate, but the damage was faster than the thought of healing. The shockwave disintegrated the flesh. It stripped the atoms apart. The beam traveled through Muzan, through the castle behind him, and into the sky. It parted the clouds on a global scale. It split the atmosphere of the planet, leaving a trench of vacuum that stretched into space. Muzan Kibutsuji, the Demon King, the perfect being, looked at his hands as they turned to dust. He felt fear, true, absolute fear. He realized he was not the main character of this universe. He was just a monster of the weak. He tried to speak. He tried to curse, but his mouth crumbled away. He vanished. There was no spirit left to haunt the world. He was simply deleted. The shockwave dissipated. The silence that followed was heavy. The infinity castle without its master began to crumble. It rained down from the sky in pieces of wood and tatami. The slayers on the floating platforms braced for impact, but the fall was slow as the magic faded gently. They landed in the ruins of Tokyo. They were alive. Tanjiro fell to his knees. He dropped his sword. He looked at the empty spot where the monster had been. He looked at the sky, which was now clear and blue, the storm clouds erased by the punch. He felt the sun on his face. It was warm. It was safe. He realized it was over. The war that had lasted 1,000 years was over in 10 minutes. Saitama landed nearby. He landed on a piece of broken concrete. He checked his suit. It was ripped at the shoulder. He groaned. He said he needed to learn how to sew. He didn't look at the slayers. He started walking away, looking for a way out of the rubble. Giyu Tomioka watched him go. The water Hashira felt a strange hollowness. He had dedicated his life to a struggle that this man had ended as a chore. He felt gratitude, but he also felt insignificant. The logic of their world, the power of breathing styles, the sacrifice of the pillars, it all seemed small in the face of such overwhelming, unfair strength. But then he looked at Tanjiro, who was crying tears of joy holding his friends. He looked at Sanemi, who was alive. He realized that the unfairness had saved them. He bowed towards the retreating back of the bald man. He bowed deeply and held it until Saitama was out of sight. The aftermath was slow and painful. The world had seen the demons. The masquerade was broken. Society had to rebuild not just its cities, but its understanding of reality. The Demon Slayer Corps was disbanded because there were no more demons to slay. Muzan's death had triggered a chain reaction that killed every demon cell on the planet. They all turned to dust. Nezuko Kamado woke up in her hiding place, human again, cured by the death of the source. Saitama returned to the butterfly mansion to pack his things. He didn't say goodbye to everyone. He wasn't good at goodbyes. He found his bag. He found his coupon, which was now expired. He was bummed about that. As he walked out of the gate, he saw Kariya Ubuyashiki waiting for him. The young boy looked older than his years. He held out a heavy envelope. It was the payment Saitama had asked for. Saitama took the envelope. He looked inside. It was enough money to buy a mountain of beef. He smiled. It was a genuine smile. He patted the boy on the head. He told him to stay in school and eat his vegetables. He turned and walked down the road. The Slayers watched him leave from the windows of the mansion. They didn't try to stop him. They knew he didn't belong in their world. He was a force of nature that had passed through, leaving a miracle in his wake. They would tell stories about him, but they would never know his name was just Saitama. They would call him the One-Punch God or the Sun's Avatar. Saitama walked until he found a strange distortion in the air, near the place he had first arrived. He stepped through it, hoping it was a shortcut home. He vanished from the Demon Slayer universe as abruptly as he had entered. The world he left behind was scarred. Tokyo was half destroyed. The mountains were reshaped, but the people were alive. Tanjiro returned to his family home with Nezuko. They rebuilt their life. Rengoku retired and taught history. Kiyu cut his hair and learned to smile. They lived. They grew old. They died natural deaths under the sun that no longer held any monsters. And in another universe, in a small apartment in Z City, Saitama woke up. He looked at his alarm clock. He realized he had slept through the big sale. He screamed. It was a scream of genuine tragedy. He didn't remember the Demon King or the castle or the worshippers. He only remembered that he missed the discount on cabbage. He put on his yellow suit and went out to patrol, hoping to find a monster that would pay for his groceries. The universe was back to normal. But somewhere across the dimensions, a world breathed freely, because a hero for fun had taken a walk. 50 years after the day of the broken sky, the geography of Japan remained permanently altered. The maps had to be redrawn to account for the canyon that bisected the central prefecture, a straight line of missing Earth that scientists still could not explain with geology. They called it the Pilgrim's Walk, a sacred site where the grass grew greener than anywhere else. The Demon Slayer Corps did not exist anymore. It dissolved quietly 3 months after the Battle of Tokyo. There was no need for swords when the night held no teeth. The wisteria flowers that once guarded prisons were now just decorations in gardens. The Ubuyashiki family used their remaining fortune to build orphanages and schools. They never spoke of the curse because the curse had been punched out of their bloodline. Tanjiro Kamado sat on the porch of his mountain home. He was an old man now, his hands calloused from charcoal and farming, not from swinging a blade. He watched his grandchildren playing in the snow. They did not know what a demon was. To them, demons were just fairy tales told to scare them into behaving. Tanjiro looked at the small shrine he kept in the corner of the yard. It did not hold a statue of a Buddha or a Shinto kami. It held a crude wood carving of a bald man with a bored expression. Tanjiro had carved it himself, trying to capture the likeness that everyone else seemed to forget. The official history books called the savior the Golden Avatar, a spirit sent by Amaterasu. They depicted him with flowing hair and golden armor. Only the survivors knew the truth. They knew he was just a man who wore a bad suit and complained about the dust. The other survivors had drifted into the currents of time. Giyu Tomioka had lived a long, quiet life, eventually passing away in his sleep, with a smile on his face. Sanemi had spent his years wandering, finding peace in the silence of the forest that no longer harbored monsters. The journals of Kyojuro Rengoku were published, becoming bestsellers on philosophy and ethics. He wrote extensively about the limits of human strength and the humility required to accept salvation from the unknown. He never mentioned the man's name, but he wrote about the day the sun rose twice. The world had moved on. Modernization swept through, bringing radios and cars and eventually televisions. The scars of the battle in Tokyo were covered by steel and glass skyscrapers, but deep in the collective unconscious of the nation, there remained a lingering memory. A memory of a sound that broke the sky. The peace that enveloped the world was heavy and absolute. It was not a peace won by a treaty or a stalemate. It was a peace granted by a force so overwhelming that it retired the concept of conflict itself. As the sun set over the mountains, casting long shadows over the peaceful valley, Tanjiro closed his eyes. He could still hear the sound of the punch. It was the sound of a period being placed at the end of a long and bloody sentence. The story of demons was over. The story of humanity had just begun.